Welcome. My name is Rachel Stevens. I'm the chapter chair for the Vermont chapter of Sierra Club. I'm a volunteer leader. In my day job, I work as an environmental justice attorney at the Vermont Law School. And this is a part of our weekly community conversation series where we host conversations around environmental and racial justice and social justice issues impacting Vermonters. This week, we are so honored to be joined by our very own Congressman Welch, who's here. And we are hoping to talk about some of what's going on in Washington. We're especially interested to talk about the Thrive agenda and also President Biden's Build Back Better plan that I think was announced in part today. For those of you that are not aware, Thrive or the Thrive agenda stands for Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy. It's a plan to tackle the overlapping crises of racial justice, mass unemployment, public health, and climate change. And it's an agenda that Sierra Club is working on to promote long-term recovery after COVID. So with that, I will turn it over to our congressman, and then we will turn to questions.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I want to thank everybody on the call and the Sierra Club for just the ongoing leadership in environmental issues. Let me just say something that expresses my feeling today. What a relief. I mean, we have had 4 years of environmental degradation. It's been like an all-out assault on even on science, on the reality of the existential crisis that we face with climate change, total disrespect for the effects, in the brutal effects, particularly on poorer communities, marginalized community, with our failure to even take up the issue of climate change and having a sensible energy policy. And of course, that's been a frustration for all of us. And it's really been an astonishing attack in the past 4 years, where scientists have been banished from the Environmental Protection Agency, where the public lands are turned over to oil companies for drilling, all of the nightmares that we know. And today, who would have thunk it? But today in Pittsburgh, Joe Biden announced a $3 trillion plan that contains many of the elements of the Thrive agenda. And it is everything from, well, first of all, it is a total acknowledgement that climate change is real and it's an existential challenge for the country. And what I find so thrilling about that is more than just that it's on the agenda. When I was dealing with, as we all were, the Trump administration climate denial, there really was, it wasn't that they didn't understand the science of it. It's not that they really didn't believe in climate change. They had another agenda, and it was to protect carbon profits from the oil companies. It was also it was a fear of taking on the challenge of addressing climate change. That apprehension, the fear of the disruption and taking on a big challenge is what was also a factor in holding it back, as well as catering to campaign donors and oil companies. Now, what we see with the new administration, and I think an extremely committed team when it comes to climate issues and our environment, is the sense that we should always have, and that is that if we're a confident country, we don't deny the existence of problems, we acknowledge them and we face them. And we understand that it's in the facing and solving of the challenges that we face, that are before us, that we actually can create jobs, create wealth, and improve communities. And that's what I see this day as being about. It's an acknowledgement that we've got a challenge, and it's a commitment to address it in a comprehensive way. So, we'll get to questions. I don't want to talk too much, but this, first of all, has a $2 trillion price tag when it comes to the infrastructure improvements and other things that are specifically related to climate change. But there's another element of this that I find so important. It's about $1 trillion that is investing in the human resources infrastructure that has been so neglected: childcare, family leave, worker training for folks who could be doing the retrofitting of these 4 million homes that is the goal of this proposal by President Biden. So it's both the physical infrastructure and human infrastructure. And the elements of this proposal are: it's the roads and bridges, of course, it's water and sewer, it's broadband build out, it is electric vehicles, it's grid modernization, it's doing all those things that are required to practically implement a goal towards reaching a carbon neutral, a net zero carbon economy. So, I am, of course, in a really wonderful position to be helpful, serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where much of this legislation will have to be considered. And, I was there years ago, when it seems so long ago, during the Obama administration, where we passed the Waxman-Markey climate bill that had as its goal 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050, which at this point is less ambition than we need. But we got that through the House in a razor-thin vote, and we lost it in the Senate. Thank you, Joe Lieberman, formerly senator from Connecticut. But just think of where we would be now as a starting point had that legislation actually been passed and implemented, signed by the president. But now we do have a very, very delicate political situation, obviously, with a 5-vote margin in the House and with a 50-50 tiebreaker situation with Vice President Harris in the Senate. And there'll be a lot of very, very hard work to get to the votes that we need to get this passed. We're not going to get any help, nothing but opposition from McConnell and from McCarthy. We know that. But I do think there's a potential to get individual Republicans who get it on climate change and want to be constructive on it. So I'm not going to give up hope that with respect to individual members, that we won't get some Republicans to indicate the bipartisan nature and importance of this all-in commitment to climate change. But it's a whole new world. We have a president who is put out the most ambitious plan about infrastructure since Eisenhower. We've had before this in our history, we've had 3 major infrastructure approaches, and infrastructure is defined differently as you go along. But Thomas Jefferson and the Gallatin, his Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin, were the first one where there were roads and there were canals, all about connecting the infant country, the United States of America. And then Teddy Roosevelt had an incredibly ambitious proposal, which was about national parks. And we enjoy the legacy of that to this day. And by the way, with the help of the Sierra Club, we managed at the end of the Trump administration to get significant funding to finally address the woefully inadequate infrastructure systems in our major national parks. And then, of course, you had Eisenhower in the 50s with the interstate highway system. And now with Joe Biden, we have a climate change orientation on this that includes a very, very specific commitment to racial and economic and environmental justice concerns that have rightfully and finally emerged as important and compelling obligations that we have to meet. So, Rachel, let me stop there because I know we have folks here and you're all very well informed, and you have questions or comments that I'm really interested in hearing about. But I got to say, I'm excited to be in Congress with the new president, with a majority on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm a member of the Sustainable Environment and Energy Caucus. There's a big amount of energy in our caucus to be as ambitious and bold as we possibly can on the long neglected effort to improve our environment and eliminate carbon emissions. So Rachel, I'll stop there and turn it back to you for questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Congressman. It is exciting to be having these kinds of conversations and the ones we were having even a year ago in terms of kind of hope for the future. So first, I'd like to invite a couple of our volunteer leaders to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will take stack and call in folks as you put your questions in. I will first turn it over to Steve Crowley, who does a lot of work with our energy and climate. Steve.
Thanks, Rachel. There we go. And thanks, Congressman, for joining us tonight. It's great to have you here. And it's great to see a new day in DC. It's almost every day is a new surprise at what how things can actually look like they're functioning. Mm-hmm. So my question for you about all this is, I think you've started to approach this already, but it's a big package. It's maybe a third of what we hope for in the, when we get to the Thrive agenda, and maybe that'll take some years, but what part of this excites you the most? Which parts of this would you go to the mat for? Which parts do you think are most important to preserve in this?
Every single thing is important, and you can make a case, as you have, that we could spend more. But this is there's a couple of things that actually the most important thing to me is that this is a real commitment that comes from the President of the United States. There have been a lot of us in Congress who've been pushing, advocating, and it's always been a little uphill. With Trump, it was obviously impossible. But this is not a faint-hearted gesture. This is a real commitment by the administration that is reflected also in a sense of purpose and seriousness with the competence of the people he's appointed. Gina McCarthy, Jennifer Granholm, just to mention two. So I see, and this is really a challenge in politics, it's to get your issue on the agenda for serious consideration, and it's there now. And the challenge for me and my job is to get the votes for all of it or more of it. And that's going to be a day-by-day process where we see where the pushback is and what we have to do to get to 218, because we're not going to get any help from the Republicans. But when you ask me what's the most important thing, it's not a particular element of the bill, because I think actually everything is really, really essential. Okay. And I don't want to be trading one environmental benefit for another. It's the confidence that there's a real commitment by the Biden administration, by the president himself, to absolutely pursue as aggressively as we can a very, very ambitious agenda. So that's actually where I get my sense of hope about this. He's all in. He is now taken this on as a major push of his administration, and he knows he'll be judged by his success or failure. And it's not the situation we had, frankly, in the Obama administration when we were doing the stimulus that was in response to the collapse of Wall Street. And there were a lot of us who were arguing we should do more. There were a lot of us, and I was really one of the most vocal, that said we shouldn't include tax cuts, and those were offered in an effort to try to get Mitch McConnell to cooperate and provide some votes. We got nothing, but we lost a third of the benefit of the spending. So I'm feeling really good about this. And if you ask me which element of it, I'm not going to pick and choose. I'm going to be all in for all of them. But I'm it's a new day for me to see a president commit himself and his administration to this ambitious of a project.
Great. Well, we'll take that. Thanks. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Steve. So Sierra Club has a prioritized equity and a just transition, especially as we think about spending trillions of dollars of federal funds. How can we ensure that those federal funds are making their way to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low-income Vermonters, especially considering Vermont is a small and rural state with demographics that are a lot different than other states. So how can we ensure that those investments,
I would say three things. Okay, first of all, in the Biden statement and on the briefings I've had, they have been very explicit that that is a goal and something that they are willing to be judged by. Okay. Number two, we have in Congress the Congressional Black Caucus that's very powerful and very influential. The Hispanic Caucus, likewise. There is, among my cohorts in Congress, it's a hyper-vigilant concern to make certain that the issues you just raised are addressed. So you've got the president who in his plan is focusing resources there. You've got in the House, particularly, a significant element of the Democratic caucus that is going to be focused on that. And then the third thing is keep an eye on this as it goes along. And if you think we're neglecting something, reach out to me and I'm accountable to you and let me know. It's because this is going to be a long process to try to get this legislatively through the House and then to the Senate.
Yeah, well, I was excited. I attended the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which is the first body of its kind, and they're looking at something called a Justice 40, where 40% of federal investments and benefits in clean energy and climate would go to BIPOC communities. But it's exciting, but it'll be important to see where the dollars actually end up.
Right, exactly.
So I'll turn it over to Jack for our next question.
Hi, Congressman. Jack Cushman from Norwich.
Hey, Jack.
How are you? I respect your reluctance to trade one environmental program off against another, especially at this early stage of the game. At the same time, I'm reading that there's a renewed willingness in Washington to have earmarks in big pieces of legislation like this. And as you well know, earmarks can be a very effective way of putting together the kind of coalition that you need. Is that the case? And do you anticipate using this process to make sure that, call them the pet rocks of various people in Vermont, have a place in this process? I mean, I see 5 people from Norwich in this group today, and we need federal money to rehab our municipal building. These are the
Right.
the places of our democracy. In Vermont?
Well, there's 2 things. First of all, as you know, earmarks, we like to use another term, congressionally directed spending, have been banned for the last 12 years. That policy has changed, and I supported the change. Now, there are strict guidelines about those congressionally directed spending. Number one, it has to be for a public benefit, so something like Tracy Hall would definitely fit in there. Okay. Number 2, I have to disclose that I'm supporting it and that I don't have any financial interest in it. The same would apply to Bernie and Patrick, which is obvious. And there has to be some level of local support for it, which is going to be true for, in your case, Tracy Hall, but would be true, for an example, in almost any town in the state. Finally, there's a limitation on how much of the appropriations bill can be included for directed spending. It's probably about 1%. So the amount of money is going to be limited, and that's going to make it frustrating because there's going to be a lot more requests than what Bernie, Patrick, and I can accommodate, but we're going to do our level best. Also, you made a really good point, and that is that, there's no cooperation right now in DC. It's like a fight for failure. With Mitch McConnell. That's his MO when he's got a Democratic administration. But you're going to see on this infrastructure bill where, among other things, we're talking about broadband. So Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell may not want Republicans to vote for this bill, but just think if you're a Republican representative in your district and the local mayors or the local utility commissions are calling up and saying, wait a minute, you're not going to vote for this when it means that we're finally going to get broadband to Corinth, Vermont equivalent in those districts. So that's the aspect of these earmarks where there's a penalty, there's a cost to some of to the failure to cooperate, because what you're doing is turning your back on helping people in your community. And this infrastructure bill, by the way, this is important. You know, I'm talking, we all know there's just this incredible division within the country that gets played out. January 6th is the best indication of that, where, you know, I was in the Capitol when that woman got shot just below me, and where the mob was trying to get through the doors where the president comes in when he's going to give a State of the Union address. But what we're doing in this infrastructure bill, this is going to help whether you live in a red state or a blue state. You know, we need broadband everywhere. Okay, so what we're talking about, and we need carbon emissions reduction everywhere. We need water and sewer that's better everywhere. And that's what I find really exciting about this, because we need it here in Vermont, but I know we need it all around the country. And it's a way of doing things that are really important to our country that has the potential to bring some unity to a very, very divided country. So that's a political element of this that I think is a positive potential for the necessity that we have more unity in this country.
Rob.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Congressman Peter Welch. I'm going to make my question short. Actually, I'm not even going to make it a question. I'm going to make it a statement, because we actually want to get some of our audience members time to ask you a couple of questions. So mine's just going to be a thank you for your sponsorship of the Electric Vehicles Act and the electric vehicles for underserved communities. Those are really key bills to get the electric vehicles incentivized and into the hands of those who can't afford them. But we appreciate that support. So I'm going to hand it back. So we just want to say thank you for your support of those.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand this to Steve to facilitate some of our questions that are coming in, and then we'll go from there. So, but thank you for all your work.
Great.
I think Rachel's going to do that.
Yeah, sure. I can jump in.
Great.
So I think our first, turning to audience questions in the chat, Matthew, I think you had a question about broadband, and also you were expressing some frustration tonight with your broadband. Did you want to ask a question or a comment about that? I know we the congressman just mentioned it, but did you have anything else you wanted to ask on that?
Sorry. Yes, sorry about that. Yes, it needs to be. It should be a universal issue. It should be on a person with disability, which we definitely.
You know, I'm sorry, Matthew, but I'm
as you know, going in. Yes, internet where
I know that Matthew is
not, underrated, staying, on Gulf. Yes, and we should make it like electricity, like utility, into focus that everybody should have access.
Yeah, you were going in and out, but I got the gist of it. We've got to have internet everywhere, much like electricity. And I totally agree with that. In the 30s, we didn't have electricity everywhere. And the Congress it was a social political decision, not an economic one, that we had to electrify rural America. The electric companies, there was no economic benefit to them to do it. And that's the same thing with a lot of these big providers like Comcast. They could care less about Corinth, Vermont. But if you live in Corinth, you care about Corinth, Vermont. And we have to establish commitment. And then number two, work with local folks who are setting up these local equivalent of rural electrification districts, but about broadband, to help them get that broadband into that last home on the most remote dirt road in their town.
Thanks so much. Scott Weathers, I think you're next in the stack if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you, Congressman. Really excited
Scott,
to see what we're going to accomplish over the next 2 years. I think it's a really exciting window that we have, and hopefully it'll last even longer than 2 years. I guess thinking, beyond this period where we have a unique opportunity with the Senate, the House, and the presidency, I'd love to just get a sense from you of whether we have any chance of bipartisan climate legislation. It's okay if the answer is no, but I would love to take, at least in my work at the state level, I do see some Republican state legislators that are have solar energy in their district, and at least are somewhat more open to renewable energy. But I don't know if that translates to the federal level.
Yeah, Scott, I think there's a chance of getting some individual Republicans to support a lot of our initiatives. And in fact, in my work in the Energy and Commerce Committee, I've had a good deal of Republican support for my energy efficiency focus. Okay, where we run into problems is at the leadership level. And I am going to be candid with you. McConnell and McCarthy have they have a single objective. McCarthy wants to take back the House. McConnell wants to take back the Senate. And every decision they make is based on, will it, as they see it, help them or hurt them, if not on the environment and whether what they do will increase or diminish carbon emissions. So we're not going to get any help from them, and we're going to get a lot of very, very illegitimate, in my view, oppositional approach to this. But there's a lot of individual Republicans that get it. I mean, they live in areas where they're seeing what's happening to their climate, and they're seeing, and they have some suburban districts where a lot of the voters really share the concern we have about climate. So I think there is a chance that we can get some individual Republican members, and I also think it's worth making the effort. Okay, because we've got, if I can work with some Republican colleagues on issues where it's going to be good for Vermonters, and I can get some Republicans to help us, that's going to be good for my prospects to do good things for us.
Thanks.
Great, thanks. Brian, you're next.
Good evening, Congressman Welch. I'm glad to be joining this conversation. My concern is biomass. Biomass in the long run is a renewable source. But right now, we're cutting down our forests in the Carolinas, shipping them to Europe, where they're burning them to meet their climate change quotas as an acceptable renewable energy source. Right now, Burlington McNeil plant is the single greatest source of pollution on carbon emissions in the whole state, because we're burning wood chips that come down from Canada, and who knows how responsibly they're harvested there. And I'm hoping that you will work to not to allow biomass to be part of any kind of solution.
Okay. No, thank you. And it raises the question: is a tree better dead, or is a tree better alive? Okay, because the biomass folks are in favor of cutting down trees and turning them into pellets, and then, as you pointed out, in some cases, those North Carolina tree farms shipping them to Europe. And folks are arguing that it's a net benefit. I'm skeptical of that. I am, and the Biden administration has not taken a position on it. I know that Gina McCarthy, who was she's now the climate advisor for the president. She was formerly at the National Defense Resources Council, and her position, I believe, was opposed to that kind of biomass you've described. So that's a debate that's underway, and I'm in the camp that's quite skeptical of the ultimate the long-term benefit that's claimed. So thank you.
Thank you.
And to second what Brian said, I completely agree. Biomass incineration, not renewable. Daniel, you're next. Daniel, did you want to ask a question? I don't see you moving to unmute. Daniel, did you want to ask your question?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, my wife was talking to me. So I don't want to be the curmudgeon, and because I think we all agree broadband is great, and Peter was talking about bringing it to the end of the dirt road in Corinth, and I just worry that although it hasn't happened yet, so maybe I'm worrying too much, that it's going to create sprawl. Like you have all these people who can work largely remotely. You can live in Corinth and have 40 acres, right? In a huge house for the price of, say, living in Hartford, or same thing where you can live in the Northeast Kingdom. So you move from Burlington, you move to the Northeast Kingdom because you can have 50 times the property. the same amount. So I just worry about
Where do you live?
Norwich.
Hi, Peter.
Michelle says hi.
Oh, hi. So, but where are you? Up in some hill? You in?
No, so we're on Bradley Hill, so we're 2.5
Yeah.
miles. I bike to work every day. That's what I do. But I just worry that you have a lot of people. I mean, you see it in cities where sprawl happened in the past.
Well, you know what? Fair point. And as you know, Vermont is getting a kind of a lot of real estate pressure. A lot of folks who can afford a second home or want to leave the city are coming up here. And a big question for them is, do they have broadband? And that's not a broadband issue. That's a COVID issue. But the issue of sprawl is a profoundly important issue, which, by the way, I think is related also to a kind of more carbon emissions. I mean, if you have all this sprawl that we had, that we didn't manage to some extent as a result of the build out of the highways that I was talking about, without having mass transit that gave people a sensible option, there were a lot of negatives that went along with the positives. And I think the sprawl issue is one that has to be addressed. And to some extent in the infrastructure plan, there's a lot for mass transit, okay? There's a big issue on sprawl about zoning and whether we should have more dense zoning, particularly around transit stations, to make it affordable for people to work. And I think that the sprawl issue you raise is totally important, but I think it's got to be addressed directly because, the folks who live in Vermont now, we have no prospect of having a modern economy and our kids getting a proper education if they don't have that high-speed internet. It just can't happen. So, we saw this with COVID. In Congress, I was the co-chair of the Rural Broadband Caucus. Before COVID, I found that when I was really trying to persuade my colleagues about money for broadband, they were a little skeptical. Their attitude was, well, move to a city where you can get broadband. We don't have to spend all that money to get broadband to you. But of course, with COVID, the kids couldn't go to school, let alone do their homework. Folks couldn't work when they had to work remotely unless they had broadband. And of course, with telemedicine, that was the only way you could get a doctor appointment during this time. So I think the consensus now clearly is we need it. But should we be wary of some of the unforeseen impacts like sprawl? I think the answer to that is yes. But there's, so other tools have to be used, but not to stop broadband, I think.
Thanks for that. Next is Claire.
Hi, good evening. My question goes, I think, more towards your role in the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. And so my question has to do with transmission build out. As you know, we might bring a lot of renewables onto the grid, but until we have transmission build out, accessing the capacity of those renewables will be limited. Right now, of course, transmission build out is limited to states. And so I'm just curious, state decisions, I'm curious if I want to take the temperature, I guess, at the federal level of changing the transmission build out to something similar to permitting of what we've seen with like natural gas pipelines, if that makes sense.
I don't know the answer to that specific question, but I do know that a big part, I think like over $100 billion in the infrastructure plan, I can get the right number for you, is about transmission and grid modernization. And you're 100% right about that. If you have renewables that you can generate in one place where there is not a shortage of renewable energy, and you can't transmit it to a place where you need it, then you may as well not build it because you don't have the capacity to transmit. So everything about moving to renewable energy involves the transmission of that energy to places that need it. So the transmission and the grid changes, both in terms of building out that grid network in dealing with the regulatory system to facilitate it. Obviously, sensitive to environmental concerns has to be a big part of our effort. By the way, what you're asking, it's so wise what you're asking, because there's been this notion that all we need is money to solve a problem. That, when we're trying to get the issue we care about on the top of the priority list, it's almost always related to the money. And money is always important. Like we can't do any of these things without a financial commitment. But it's not enough to have the financial commitment. You start asking the practical questions that is implicit in what you're asking me about the transmission system. All right, we now have the money and we have the capacity to generate. How do we get it to my house? How do we get it to that business? And that's the really hard work that it has to be done once we do get the resources there. But that priority, that insight you had about the necessity of having a modern transmission system, that's integrated into the Biden infrastructure plan, an acknowledgement of that.
Great, thanks. Next, we have Steve Webster. Sorry for skipping over you there.
No problem. Congressman Welch, it's great to have you with us and really appreciate all the hard work you've done for us. Quick question. I wonder, are you driving a 100% electric car yet?
No.
And are you giving any thought to getting one soon? You'd be a great role model for people.
No, I'd like to. I would like to do that. I tend to drive my cars pretty hard. Usually a couple 100,000 miles. My biggest one was 335,000 miles. I have a little bit of worry about the distance, because I do have to on occasion just be in the car for long distances. But I'd like to, and I'm doing everything I can policy wise to help folks have that as an affordable option. What do you drive?
We have 100% electric Leaf and 100% electric Chevy Bolt.
Cool. How do you like them?
I love them.
Yeah,
they're just great
Congressman,
cars.
Maybe we can send you. We got some testimonials from Vermonters who love their electric cars and did a whole video competition. So we can send you that link if you want to hear some.
Rachel, what do you drive?
I drive a hybrid Ford C-Max. So yeah, I'm a hybrid. Okay, next we've got Anne.
Thank you. And thank you, Congressman Welch, for doing this discussion and for signing the Thrive Act. I understand that you've signed it, and Senator Sanders has signed it, and we need to get Senator Leahy to sign it. That would be wonderful. Would you agree with John Kerry's point of view that government cannot fund this alone, that we need a huge injection of private investment? I heard him say that during a talk with Al Gore. I think it was on Countdown. If so, if you agree with John Kerry, how can we make sure that those dollars go towards green technology and innovation rather than lining the wrong pockets?
Well, first of all, I do agree with Secretary Kerry. The private market gets it much more than, say, the Trump administration did. Like Ford Motor Company just made a decision they're going to go all electric, right? GM made that decision. Now, they didn't do it because they want to get the accolades of the Sierra Club. They did it because they see that's where the market's going. And if they don't do it, they're going to be left behind, all right? So a lot of, I think, that corporate activity is going to be motivated by the individual consumer choices and what they assess is where the market is going. So this is where I think, the question Steve asked me about getting an electric car, it really is something of a political act to make that choice, because then that creates the momentum for that to become the dominant way people travel. So in what I've been surprised at is how really retrograde the Trump administration has been, even as some of our major utility companies have taken very constructive steps towards the effort to decarbonize. So I think that's what Secretary Kerry is talking about, is that a lot of these major companies are making decisions where they believe they can look their shareholders in the eye and say, hey, this is good for the bottom line. We're not doing this just because it happens to be the right thing to do for the planet. So I think that's happening. Then when you get public policies that accelerate it, that's why, for instance, I've been a big advocate for the rebate, the tax credit on purchasing an electric vehicle. because that does make it more affordable. And when cars are, you need a car, but you got to be able to afford it. We need an industry that's committed to it, where then once you get the manufacturing at scale, the price starts to go down. So it's a combination of public policies that encourage what you think reflects a social policy that is worth supporting. And then that combined with then the private sector seeing, hey, there's a market here, let's go. So I agree with Secretary Kerry.
Great. So Congressman, I know you have a hard stop.
Yeah.
I wonder, William Scott, do you want to ask your question quickly? And then for folks on the line, we will stay on and continue discussion of Thrive Agenda after the Congressman hops off. So William Scott, do you have a quick
Sure.
question? Rapid fire.
Yeah, I agree with the rollout of the funding and jobs programs first. That makes perfect sense to me. But I wonder, Congressman, if you see a similar kind of comprehensive thinking in the administration and in Congress on regulation and on how you implement the new policies in this agenda through states where a lot of the action has to take place.
Well, it's two things. You've talked about regulation and also state participation. Regulation is a tool that's been neglected, obviously, by the Trump administration. You know, Barney Frank used to famously say, the only thing worse than bad regulation is absolutely no regulation, because then it's a race to the bottom. And regulation can be an equalizer and then create incentives for companies to compete on quality as opposed to a race to the bottom. Like Energy Star Standard is a good example. You know, it's really been helpful and the industry likes it as long as what we're doing is reasonable. So I favor using that tool in appropriate cases, just like I favor using the tool of a tax credit in an appropriate case. The state level is going to depend a lot on state leadership. Okay, so and we've got a very activist public here in Vermont that has long time been very much a fierce advocate for good environmental policy. So the work you have been doing is going to continue to be extremely important to make sure that there's a maximum uptake here in Vermont, leveraging whatever policies we're able to implement with the Thrive Agenda down in DC.
Thank you so much for your time. I know you have to run. We really appreciate you taking so many questions and all the work that you're doing representing us all.
Well, Rachel, you kind of say that. I think I want to thank you and everyone there for all the work you're doing as well. It's great. By the way, it's great to represent Vermont. It really is. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
We
will hang around. We're going to hang around. I'm sorry. I think we only missed one question, so I'm sorry about that, Suzanne, for not getting to ask your question about hydropower. But are there Rob or Steve? Go ahead, Rob.
Just before we continue, before anybody leaves, I want to remind people to send Congressman Peter Welch a thank you note for sponsoring the Thrive Agenda, and then also to Senator Bernie Sanders. You see both of the links. But also, Senator Leahy has not signed on to it yet. So if you can send him a message today saying, please sign on to the Thrive Agenda. Congressman Welch has joined on. Senator Sanders has, and why haven't you yet? So if we can encourage them to do that. I'll put those links into the chat in a second. But just want to remember that to thank them first for doing the right thing. And then Senator Patrick Leahy, he still needs to be talked into joining it.
And Rob, can you also put a link so folks can get more information about the Thrive Agenda? And we can also answer a few questions here as well. Steve, did you want to add anything?
I didn't have anything to add. I think, it's as we get information from National CR Club that's staying on top of the latest proposals, what we hear is a lot of enthusiasm. It's the Build Back Better program that was released today is maybe a third or a quarter of what we were shooting for in the Thrive Agenda. So, it's a start. We're not going to not support it, but it's it's not totally where we need to be, but it's a start.
Great. I definitely want to make a plug as well for folks that if you want more information, you can sign up for our email lists. Continue to join us at these weekly community conversations. We also love if you have a topic in mind or speakers that you would love to hear from, you can contact Rob. And we are, we are committed to trying to do these every Wednesday evening, and would love to hear from you what topics you would like us to discuss and what speakers you'd like to host. I'd also like to make a plug for our volunteer teams. We have some active campaigns going on in the state. We have a transportation team and we have an energy and climate team that is following the state's climate council and the work there, and also the infrastructure and transportation bill at the state level. So I'll just mention, since we have a few minutes, that we also have a grassroots network campaign where we host a series of advocacy trainings for folks that have questions about getting involved in the legislative process. We're also going to host, hopefully, a training about the state budget if you have questions or want to understand how the state budgeting process works. So for any of those opportunities or ways to plug in, definitely stay in touch with us. I will stop there. Does anyone have questions or things that you want to talk about in our last 11 minutes?
I'll just quickly point out, Dan Fingus from Rights and Democracy just posted a direct link to submit comments to Senator Leahy. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Rad has been doing some great work on the Thrive agenda as well.
Dan, did you want to add anything about Thrive or what Rad's doing on that?
No, I think you guys are doing great work. Really appreciated this conversation with Congressman Welch. He's been a supporter, but it's great to hear people dig down on issues with him and really push him to do as much as possible. I would just, I think, mention what Steve just said. I think 3 or 4 billion is what they're looking at for the recovery plan, and the Thrive agenda is closer to, trillion. The Thrive agenda is closer to 10 trillion. So a lot of gap between, the big bold plan that we're hoping for and what the Build Back Better is. And so we've got a lot of work to push this to be as big as possible. A lot of people think this is unfortunately the last big thing that's going to happen before the next election, which is a long way away. So we really have to try to get as much as we can out of this recovery bill.
Great. Other comments, questions about what we're doing at the state, ways you can plug in? All right. Well, with that, we can say goodnight. I'm sure everyone is zoomed out. Oh, Matthew. I see a hand raised.
Yes. Finally, let's see if you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Let's bring in, what we had discussion before, people with disabilities. Let's try to bring them into the conversation so we can build back better on that. We can bring it around a conversation around an agenda for that. So it will bring those BIPOC communities in. So it would help us all move forward so we can actually get our agenda across what we need.
That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. I'm seeing some thumbs up too in the room here.
All right. Next week's plug, Rachel.
Oh yes, go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, next week we have a wonderful conversation with Melody and Rick from the Crowley part of Abenaki tribe. And it's going to be about relation to the land, and super excited because I have been in the works with these people for well over a month. So I'm very, very excited to have this actually come into fruition. Should be good talk.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, please join us next week. You can find all of our events online at our website, sierraclub.org/Vermont. We have an events calendar where all of our events will be posted, our community conversations, all of our trainings and upcoming meetings and events. You can also reach out to us. Our contact information is there. I'll leave it there, Rob.
Yeah, the two trainings that we scheduled, they're just posted onto the website today. So I didn't get on the slide here, but we have a legislative advocacy training, I think on Monday the 12th at 6 p.m. and then also on the Tuesday the 7th, we have a training on the budget process. So that's available on our website. I just didn't get enough time to put on the slide. So that's it for today then.
Great. Yeah, definitely encourage you all to get involved with us. And yes, the Abenaki conversation is on Zoom, and you can find the link on our website.
Yeah,
we can also maybe put it in the chat.
To register, yep.
Yep. Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.